Liam Hart had never believed in curses until the night he found the old playbill with his name printed under the final act. At first he thought it was some prank left behind by the theater's ghost-obsessed crew. But when the stage lights flickered on by themselves and his reflection stepped out from the mirror, smiling like it had been waiting for him all along, he realized the Crescent Theater didn't want an audience anymore. It wanted a performer, and it had already chosen him. The first time I stepped into the old Crescent Theater, the air felt wrong. Not just cold or damp, but thick, almost alive. It clung to my lungs, carrying the faint smell of ashes and old wood varnish. The building had been closed for nearly 20 years after a tragic fire ended several lives during a live performance. When I got the night caretaker job, everyone told me the same thing. Don't go near the stage after midnight. I laughed at that. Ghost stories didn't scare me. But standing there that first night, under the cracked chandelier, I started to understand why people still whispered about this place. My footsteps echoed across the marble floor, sharp and lonely. Rows of torn velvet seats faced the stage like silent witnesses, their fabric eaten by time and rats. My flashlight beams swam through the dust, catching glimpses of broken masks, faded playbills, and shattered instruments. The theater had once been a grand place, I could tell. Even in ruin, there was elegance, the golden trim along the walls, the intricate carvings of angels on the ceiling. Yet every angel's face was blackened with soot, like they'd watched the fire and done nothing to stop it. I checked the schedule I'd been given: doors locked by 11, lights off at midnight, patrol the aisles until dawn. Easy money, or so I thought. The first hour passed quietly. I walked the upper balcony, sweeping my flashlight along the rows. Somewhere far below, something creaked, long and low, like a heavy door being pushed open. I called out, but my voice died before it reached the stage. It was too quiet in there, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound loud and unnatural. At around 2 a.m., I started hearing faint noises, footsteps, slow and careful, coming from above the ceiling. The sound drifted across the rafters where the catwalks were, exactly the place I'd been warned not to go. I waited, thinking it might be a rat, but then I heard the metallic jingle of chains. My heart thudded. I shined the flashlight upward, catching glimpses of hanging rope swaying slightly in the dark. For a while, the sound stopped, and I tried convincing myself it was nothing. I turned toward the lobby, but that's when the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make every shadow twitch. The chandelier trembled overhead, scattering broken glass that tinkled across the marble. I froze where I stood. Then, faintly, a whisper brushed my ear. So close it felt like someone was standing right behind me. But when I turned, there was no one there. My nerves were on edge, but curiosity won over fear. I climbed the narrow staircase that led to the catwalks. Each step moaned under my weight. When I reached the top, the air was colder, sharper. The catwalk stretched out like a skeleton over the stage. My flashlight flickered weakly, its battery dying too soon. I swept the beam around, and something caught my eye. A length of rope hanging from one of the rafters. It was looped into a noose. The rope swayed slightly as if it had just been released. I took a step closer. The beam dimmed again, and for a moment everything went black. I could hear something moving, a dragging sound, heavy and slow, coming from somewhere to my right. The air shifted. The smell of smoke grew stronger, mixed with something sweet and rotten. Then a sudden snap echoed through the rafters, like a rope tightening. When the light finally came back, the rope was still swinging, but now it was frayed at the bottom, as if it had broken recently. My chest tightened. I shined the flashlight toward the stage, far below. The red curtain that had been closed earlier was now half lifted, exposing part of the stage floor. And standing there, directly under the spotlight, was a dark figure, still, unmoving. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the stage. I couldn't make out a face, just the faint outline of a person, tall, thin, with one arm slightly raised as though about to perform. The theater was silent again, except for the faint creak of the hanging ropes above me. I felt a strange pull, like I was being watched, not by one thing, but by many. I took a slow step backward, afraid to make a sound. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there under the light, waiting. I told myself to get out, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs were locked, my throat dry. Then, with no warning, the spotlight flickered off. Total darkness swallowed the stage. A heartbeat later, the light came back, empty. The figure was gone. But when I looked down at the front row, something else caught my eye. All the seats, once covered in dust, were now spotless, and in the center seat, the only one perfectly upright, was a single mask, white, cracked, and facing the stage, as if someone had been sitting there all along, watching me. That was the moment I realized I was not alone in the Crescent Theater. When I returned to the Crescent Theater the following night, a part of me hoped everything that happened before was just exhaustion, maybe even imagination. But as I stood before those heavy brass doors, staring at the faint scorch marks on the frame, I knew deep down that it hadn't been a dream. The memory of that figure under the spotlight stayed burned behind my eyelids. I had almost convinced myself not to go in, but quitting wasn't an option. Rent doesn't wait for fear. The doors groaned when I pushed them open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled faintly like burned wood and something sour underneath. The main hall was exactly as I left it. Rows of torn seats, cracked stage lights hanging from the ceiling, and dust floating like ghosts in the air. But there was one difference. The curtain, which I had seen half raised last night, was now fully open. The stage behind it was bathed in an unnatural glow, though none of the lights were on. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I walked down the center aisle. My boots crunched over broken glass and scattered debris. I could see faint marks on the floor, like something heavy had been dragged across the stage. As I reached the front row, my light caught the same mask I'd seen the night before. It had been moved. No longer resting on the seat, it was placed perfectly on the stage steps, facing the audience, as if waiting for me to put it on. The sight made my stomach twist. I wanted to throw it aside, but something about it felt sacred, forbidden. My eyes lifted to the balcony above, where the shadows seemed thicker tonight. The building creaked, settling into its bones. But there was something else under the noise. A soft humming. A melody, almost like someone rehearsing quietly behind the curtain. It rose and fell gently, hauntingly beautiful, but no words followed. Only a low hum that didn't sound entirely human. I climbed onto the stage, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. The moment I stepped onto the wooden boards, the humming stopped. Silence swallowed everything. I could feel the air shift again, as if the theater was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, the old spotlight flickered on, casting its pale beam straight at me. Dust danced through the light, and in that glow, I noticed something strange, a faint outline on the stage floor, darker than the rest of the wood. When I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a stain, a shape, human-shaped. The reports had mentioned several actors trapped by the falling curtain during the fire. I knelt down, tracing the edge of the mark with trembling fingers. The wood was colder here, slick almost, like it had absorbed something that never dried. I could almost smell the faint metallic tang of blood beneath the burnt scent. I stood quickly, wiping my hand on my pants, trying to shake off the feeling crawling up my arm. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate clap. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound came from the audience seats. I swung my flashlight toward the rows, but they were empty. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. The clapping started again, echoing across the hall, but this time it sounded distant, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I called out, but my voice came out hoarse, swallowed by the space. The air turned colder. My breath came out in short clouds. And then, something brushed my ankle. I looked down, expecting a rat, but it wasn't. One of the velvet ropes used to mark the aisles had uncoiled itself. It slithered across the floor like it was alive, wrapping loosely around my boot before retreating slowly, dragging a trail of dust with it. Panic finally overtook curiosity. I rushed toward the exit, my flashlight beam jumping wildly, but the heavy doors wouldn't move. I shoved and kicked, the metal rattling but refusing to open. Behind me, the sound of the clapping grew louder. I turned around. The spotlight had shifted, no longer aimed at the stage but at the front row. In the center seat, where the mask had been before, someone was now sitting. I couldn't see details, only a shape, pale and still. Its head tilted slightly as if studying me. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me vibrated faintly, the way sound does just before a scream. And then, without warning, the theater's lights snapped on for just a second, bright and blinding. In that flash, every seat was full. Rows and rows of figures sat silently, each one wearing the same cracked white mask. When the lights cut back to darkness, the seats were empty again. But the clapping didn't stop. It was right behind me now, soft, slow, and deliberate. I turned, flashlight trembling, but there was no one there. Only the stage, still glowing faintly, and the single mask resting once again on the steps, turned toward me. This time, though, the mask wasn't empty. Behind the cracks, I could see eyes, watching me. I didn't sleep after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those rows of white masks staring at me from the dark. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd quit and forget the whole thing, but something inside me wouldn't let go. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe the theater had already started pulling me in. Either way, when the third night came, I found myself standing before those brass doors again, key trembling in my hand. The air felt heavier this time. The moment I stepped inside, a low hum greeted me, barely audible like the vibration of strings beneath the floor. My flashlight cut through the dark, catching glimpses of broken mirrors along the wall. I could see my reflection in each one, faint and fragmented, but something was wrong. In one of them, my reflection wasn't holding the flashlight. It was standing still, arms at its sides, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the glass, a smear, a distortion from age. Still, unease followed me as I made my way to the stage. The curtain was down again, but it looked different. The fabric, once dull and dusty, was now deep crimson as if newly dyed. I could smell faint smoke in the air like burned velvet. I decided to set up my camera that night. If strange things were happening here, I wanted proof. I placed it on a tripod facing the stage, turned it on, and began pacing the aisles. Every step I took sounded too loud, echoing endlessly through the hollow theater. Around 1:30 a.m., a faint flicker appeared on the camera's small screen. A shadow moved behind the curtain, just for a second. Then it was gone. I watched carefully. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. Minutes passed. Then slowly, the curtain began to sway, though there was no breeze. It moved like someone was standing behind it, brushing their hands along the fabric. The camera kept recording, its tiny red light blinking steadily. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a whisper. It grew louder, clearer. It was voices, dozens of them, overlapping, rehearsing lines I couldn't fully make out. Laughter, the shuffle of feet, the clatter of props. It was as if a full cast was performing behind that curtain. But there was no one here. I stepped closer, straining to hear. For a moment, I could almost understand the words. A man's voice, deep and broken. "Places, everyone. Curtains in 5. Then silence. Absolute silence. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned back toward the camera, but something stopped me. The curtain was moving again, but this time it wasn't just swaying. It was rising, slowly, as if pulled by invisible hands. I took a step back, my flashlight shaking in my grip. Behind the curtain stood figures, dim outlines in the smoky light, frozen in various poses, like actors waiting for a cue. But they weren't solid. They flickered faintly, their forms trembling like candlelight. And then one of them turned its head toward me. The movement was so sudden that I stumbled backward. I aimed the flashlight directly at the stage, but the beam passed right through them. They weren't human. They were shadows, burnt silhouettes etched into the air. One by one, they began to fade, until only a single figure remained in the center of the stage. It was standing under the old spotlight, staring directly at the camera. My flashlight caught its face and I froze. It wasn't one of the shadow figures. It was me. I couldn't breathe. I stood rooted to the spot, watching that thing tilt its head slowly, its expression calm and hollow. It raised its hand, mimicking the way I held my flashlight. Then it smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Just enough to make my stomach turn. The camera screen flickered, distorting the image with static. I ran toward it, fumbling for the power switch, but before I could touch it, the entire stage went dark. The hum stopped. The theater fell into silence so deep it rang in my ears. Then, from somewhere above, I heard the ropes creak again. I pointed the flashlight upward, catching glimpses of the catwalks. One of the nooses was swinging slowly, as if freshly cut. I turned back to the camera and hit play on the small screen. The video played fine for a few seconds. Just me walking, the empty stage, the swaying curtain. Then the picture distorted, warping into black and white. The sound of crackling filled the air. When the static cleared, the image froze. I was there, standing in front of the curtain. But behind me, clearer than before, stood another version of me, perfectly still, eyes wide open, staring straight into the lens. I felt cold all over. I looked around, flashlight trembling, half expecting to see that figure standing behind me now, but the theater was empty, silent. I grabbed the camera and ran out, not daring to look back. When I finally stepped outside, I checked the footage again under the streetlight. The last frame hadn't changed. It still showed me standing on that stage with something just behind my shoulder, something smiling faintly in the dark. But this time, the reflection on the lens didn't match my face. I woke up the next morning drenched in sweat, my mind replaying the distorted images from that camera. Every time I blinked, I saw that other version of myself staring back. Eyes too wide, smile too calm. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the lens, some glitch caused by the flickering lights in that cursed place. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was inside that theater, something that knew me. Still, I couldn't stay away. That night, I went back again. Maybe it was guilt for abandoning the job, or maybe it was the strange pull I felt every time I thought about the stage. Whatever it was, it led me there as if my body no longer belonged to me. When I arrived, the theater wasn't dark this time. The lights in the lobby were glowing faintly, golden and warm, like the place had come back to life. For a second, it even looked beautiful. Marble floors polished, ticket windows spotless, the smell of dust replaced by perfume and paint. My flashlight wasn't needed. Everything was lit up, alive and wrong. Posters hung neatly along the walls. I froze when I looked closer. The title read, "The Final Act," written in gold letters that shimmered under the light. Below it was a picture of a man standing on the Crescent Theater stage, me. My own face, smiling beneath the words, "Starring Jonathan Pryce." My hands shook as I ripped one of the posters down, but the others stayed perfectly still, like they were glued to the wall. The date at the bottom made my skin crawl. It was tonight. I stepped into the main hall, and my heart stopped. Every seat was filled. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people sat perfectly still in the audience, all dressed in old-fashioned theater clothes, suits, gowns, hats. Their faces were pale, powdered white, and each of them wore a faint, fixed smile. I couldn't hear a single breath from them. They didn't blink. They didn't move. The spotlight came on with a sudden click, casting its harsh glow directly on me. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was like invisible strings had hooked into my body, pulling me forward. My chest tightened as I walked toward the stage, each step echoing in perfect rhythm, like I was following choreography I didn't remember learning. When I stepped onto the stage, the smell of burnt wood filled the air again. The curtain rose slowly, revealing a blackened backdrop scorched by fire. The hum returned, low and constant, vibrating through my bones. The audience leaned forward in unison, their heads tilting slightly as though waiting for me to speak. But I couldn't. My throat was locked. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement behind the curtain. A shadow detached itself from the darkness and stepped forward, my reflection again. He was identical to me in every way, except his skin looked untouched by fear. He moved gracefully, confidently, like a man who belonged there. He walked to the center of the stage and bowed deeply to the audience. The pale crowd clapped in perfect rhythm, the sound hollow and unreal. Then he turned to me. His eyes were calm, too calm. His lips parted in that same faint smile I'd seen in the video. My heart pounded as he extended his hand, gesturing for me to come closer. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my legs moved forward without my permission. I reached for him, my hand trembling. When our fingers almost touched, the temperature dropped. The stage lights flickered violently, and a faint whisper rose from the audience. Thousands of overlapping voices murmuring my name. Suddenly, the spotlight shifted, cutting across the stage. For a brief moment, I saw what was behind my reflection. The blackened walls of the stage weren't walls at all. They were mirrors. Every surface reflected the same scene over and over again, an endless line of me and him facing each other. And in each reflection, he was closer, while I seemed to fade. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, desperate. The reflection's eyes darkened, empty and bottomless. He stepped closer and leaned in until our foreheads almost touched. I could feel a freezing pressure against my skin. My vision blurred. The sound of the clapping grew deafening, filling my head with static. Then, in an instant, everything stopped. Silence. When my vision cleared, I wasn't on the stage anymore. I was sitting in the front row, staring at the curtain as it slowly began to fall. The audience was gone. The lights were dim. The theater was cold again, just as it had been before. My body ached as if I'd been hit by something heavy. I looked toward the stage one last time and froze. My reflection was still there, standing under the fading spotlight. He wasn't moving, but I could feel him smiling at me even from that distance. Slowly, he turned his head toward the audience and bowed again. And then, the curtain closed between us. When I woke, the theater was silent. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the air, though everything around me looked untouched. I sat in the front row, disoriented, my flashlight lying beside me on the floor, its beam flickering weakly. The stage curtain was drawn, the spotlight off, and the vast emptiness of the Crescent Theater stretched around me like a mouth that had swallowed me whole. My throat was dry, my head pounding. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, unsteady, as though I hadn't moved in hours. I couldn't remember how I'd ended up sitting there. The last thing I recalled was the face, my face, leaning close under the blinding light, the sound of applause echoing like thunder. Everything after that was blank, a hollow space in my memory. I forced myself to the doors, desperate to leave, but when I pushed, they didn't budge. They rattled, groaned, but refused to open. I hit them again and again until my hands ached. The metal was ice-cold, unyielding. When I turned around, something had changed. The posters in the lobby, those glowing advertisements for the final act, were gone. In their place hung new ones, edges still crisp, the ink fresh. They bore the same title, but the lead actor's name wasn't mine anymore. It read, "Directed by Jonathan Pryce." The image beneath showed the same stage, but the man performing there was the reflection I had seen before, the one with the calm eyes and the perfect smile. My stomach twisted. I stumbled back into the main hall, scanning the rows of seats, half expecting the masked audience to be there again. But they were empty this time, all except for the center seat in the front row. Something white rested there. I moved closer, my heart hammering harder with every step. It was the mask. The same cracked white mask that had appeared again and again, its surface now smeared faintly with soot. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was heavier than before. The inside was damp, almost warm, like someone had been wearing it moments ago. I dropped it instantly. The sound echoed, unnaturally loud, bouncing across the empty hall until it faded into silence. Then, from behind the curtain, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, measured. They didn't sound distant this time. They sounded like someone walking directly toward me. I aimed my flashlight at the stage, but the curtain stayed still. The footsteps stopped. A pause, then a faint dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. The curtain began to rise, inch by inch. My pulse quickened. The wooden boards of the stage gleamed under the returning spotlight. At first, there was nothing. Then I saw it, a figure standing exactly where I had been before, dressed in the same clothes, same posture, same face. It was me. I took a step backward. The figure mirrored it perfectly, moving as though connected by invisible strings. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw others behind him. Shapes, faint and translucent, like echoes of people frozen mid-performance. They surrounded him, forming a circle, heads bowed. The air grew colder. My breath came out in mist. I wanted to run, but my body refused to listen. My reflection on stage slowly lifted its head, tilting it to the side, and smiled that familiar, hollow smile. The faint sound of applause filled the air again, distant at first, then louder, rising from nowhere and everywhere. I screamed at the doors, banging until my voice broke, but the applause drowned everything out. The spotlight above dimmed and then flared again, brighter than before. I looked back and saw that my reflection was gone. The stage was empty. The applause stopped abruptly, leaving behind a vacuum of silence so deep it made my ears ring. Then a whisper filled the air. My own voice. Close, right beside my ear. "Your turn." I spun around, but no one was there. My flashlight blinked out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I fumbled for the switch, hands shaking, heart racing. When the light came back, I was standing on the stage. The audience seats were full again. The masked figures had returned, sitting perfectly still, their pale faces aimed toward me. I couldn't move. My arms and legs felt heavy, anchored in place. Somewhere above me, the ropes began to creak, the same sound I'd heard on my first night. A faint smell of smoke drifted down from the ceiling. I looked up. Flames flickered faintly along the rafters, growing brighter, spreading quickly. The audience didn't react. They just sat there, clapping slowly, their heads tilting in unison. The heat intensified. The stage lights popped and cracked, glass raining down. I screamed again, but no sound came out this time. My throat was locked tight, as if invisible hands were around it. The curtain began to fall, inch by inch. Through the smoke, I caught sight of a figure standing in the aisle, the reflection, calm and untouched by the flames, watching me burn. He raised his hand in a slow wave, his expression serene, almost pitying. The curtain dropped fully, sealing me in darkness. The last thing I heard was the faint echo of applause, fading slowly into nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't on the stage anymore. I was sitting in the front row, mask resting on my lap. The theater was quiet. No smoke, no fire, only the faint hum of lights above. On the stage, the reflection stood in the center, alive and real. He bowed deeply, and behind him the curtain lifted to reveal new posters hanging in perfect rows, each one bearing my face, smiling widely beneath the words, "Now showing." The spotlight dimmed, leaving only one light shining on me. The mask in my lap was warm again, pulsing faintly, like something breathing inside it. And then I understood. The show wasn't over. It was just my turn to perform.